Our last presentation of the day is testing the effectiveness of an advocacy program among parents of transition-aged youth with autism, presented by Dr. Megan Burke from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Dr. Burke is a professor of special education and education policy, organization, and leadership at the University of Illinois. She is also the co-associate director for the LEND program at the University of Illinois at Chicago. She will discuss research developed to test the effectiveness of the parent advocacy program for parents of transition-aged youth this afternoon. So now, Dr. Burke, I'm pleased to introduce you and take it away.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here, especially at the end of a long day of great presentations that you've had. I'm excited to talk about testing the effectiveness of actually two advocacy programs that we've developed among parents of transition-aged youth with autism. And I'm also happy to answer any questions that may come up as I walk through some of this. So I know I'm preaching a bit to the choir here, but I think it's important to kind of ground ourselves in thinking about services. And so what we know for individuals with autism, as well as individuals with other types of disabilities, is that services matter. We know that individuals with autism often need a variety of different types of services. We also know that without access to services, individuals with autism may not only not make progress, but they may regress in the skills that they have. Oh, you're not seeing this, right?
Yeah, we're seeing your presenter window with a little purple got it box.
Let me try something else. Oh, maybe this is. Does that look better? Does that look better?
It's coming. Hold on.
Okay.
It says you've started screen sharing, but we're seeing a blank screen.
Let's see.
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Always some technical issues, right? Okay. So when we think about access to services, we know that it can be difficult for families of kids with autism across the lifespan, really, to access services. And what we've been trying to look at in our research team and with collaborators at the University of Wisconsin at Madison, as well as at Vanderbilt, is to try to identify malleable factors that we can improve among families or individuals with autism and can be targeted for interventions so that we can improve access to services. Now, one of the factors that we've identified is parent advocacy. In a study that we've done with 185 parents of transition-aged youth with autism across 3 states, Illinois, Tennessee, and Wisconsin, we looked at the correlation between advocacy done by the parent, as well as the number of services that the transition-aged youth with autism was receiving. And what we found is that even after controlling for youth functioning and family demographic variables, parent advocacy significantly and strongly predicted the number of services that the youth was receiving. So when I'm talking about the things that we controlled for, we looked at, whether or not the youth had an intellectual disability, whether or not they had exited high school, their gender, the extent of kind of social communication impairments and adaptive behaviors. For the family, we controlled for the state they were in. As you would expect, there are a lot of differences among the 3 states in terms of adult services. We controlled for that. We also controlled for race and ethnicity, the household income of the family, and parent depressive symptoms. Those, I think, are some of the common factors that we would think may help people access services. We think of income. We may think parents with higher income would be better able to access services. So to try to address that and just look at the impact of parent advocacy, we controlled for all of those factors. And what we found is that parent advocacy uniquely explained almost 11% of the variance in service access, which is a big chunk of services that the youth was receiving. So this study, I think, really tells us parent advocacy is a very malleable factor that we can target for intervention that should improve access to services.
Jay is 21.
So to underscore this, and it wasn't in my bio, but I also have a son with autism. And so I think it's really important to hear directly from families to really ground ourselves in what works, what's feasible, what are the lived experiences of family members and autistic youth, and kind of how can we use that to inform interventions that we're developing and testing. So this is a parent of 2 children with autism who are now both adults. And I think she, in her testimony here, really talks about the value of parent advocacy as well as the barriers that families often face in learning to advocate. So I'm going to share her video so you can hear from her.
And Anand is 18. My wonderful, amazing younger son, Anand, has autism, but autism does not define him. My biggest concern is not only access of services, but knowing of one's rights and possibility. Parenting is hard in itself, and having a child with disability impacting his and everyone's life around him, it's even harder. I wish there was a manual to raise a kid and another manual for navigating the system for services. I wish I had known 14 years ago what I know today. Every day we learn something new from our kid and something new for our kid. Fighting for every little thing with school and system, it's very, very frustrating. And we shouldn't be spending our energy on that. We need to change that. Our kids need our patience, our energy, our knowledge. The better school system, which gives kids what they need, is needed. We need a way to explain what should be done and how it should be done. A manual to explain the system, services, possibilities, what is available, on what can be done in a better way. We need some resources to explain the families who are new in this, who have no idea what is in it for them in future. I cannot turn the time back for my son, but I decided to help the other moms who are in the same situation. I share my knowledge. I bring moms together so they can share their concern, share the ideas, and be there for each other. I built the Moms Network for Indians moms so they can come together and build a bridge between two different cultures they share. I wish I could have done it earlier. I wish I could have done it in a better way.
So I think she does a really lovely job talking about the importance of parent advocacy, how hard parent advocacy can be in terms of understanding your rights and the services that are available, and also how she's really paying it forward and how parents, including myself, we often learn best from other families about how to navigate different service delivery systems. And these are all topics that kind of intertwine throughout my presentation. So as she mentioned, there are many barriers to parent advocacy. And I know you have had a full day, so I'm not going to go through all of the various barriers that we see when parents try to advocate. But suffice it to say, there are a lot of them. And I think when we look at the school context, I like to show this comic strip, which I think summarizes some of these barriers that families face in advocating within a school setting. So you may have seen this before. It's a comic strip. It has a series of school professionals on one side of the table and a parent and an advocate on the other side of the table. A school professional says, "I'm not sure why Mr. Barth always feels compelled to bring an advocate to the IEP meeting." And at the bottom, it says outnumbered ? I think this is really common, including for someone like myself, who, even though I have a lot of education about special education, it can feel overwhelming to attend IEP meetings. It can be hard to speak up in those meetings when you're by yourself. It can feel like you're one person against several people. And so it makes parent advocacy really difficult, even though we know from the study I just showed you that parent advocacy can really matter in terms of accessing services. Now, when we look at adult services, I think the same comic strip can still apply to our service plan meetings, but I think there are a few unique things that are going on with adult disability services that are a little different than special education. One is that we know adult disability services are notoriously underfunded. So when I, mentioned the different states and controlling for them in that earlier study, so we had Tennessee, Illinois, and Wisconsin, each of which have their own kind of unique things about their service delivery systems for adult services. Illinois is especially unique with having over 14,000 people waiting for Medicaid waiver services, right? It's underfunded in our state. It's very difficult to access those services. That makes advocacy very difficult. It's also difficult because services are fragmented. So whereas in the school system, all of your services tend to be coming from the school, although maybe not exclusively. When somebody transitions into the adult service delivery system, you're looking at different agencies with different regulations, different eligibility schemes, different ways of application, different wait times, and different services that they're providing in terms of financial assistance, employment supports, home and community living, educational supports, and future planning. And so it really makes it much more difficult, I think, to advocate in the adult service world. As one example of that, I like to walk through SSI benefits. SSI is financial assistance that, in this context, adults with disabilities, including autism, can receive if they're not able to have substantial gainful employment. And this is just one piece of the adult service delivery system. It's just one system, but it's very common for a lot of people to need this kind of assistance. And the first step is really applying for SSI. So you fill out the application, you get all of your materials together, and you fill out the application, which is a lot in and of itself. Then you wait 6 months to hear, and then you likely get rejected from SSI because 2/3 of people just automatically get rejected the first time they apply for SSI. So that's automatically feeling very defeating and disempowering for a lot of families. Then maybe you appeal the SSI decision. There's various levels of appeals. Hopefully you get the SSI around your first appeal. And then you have to designate a representative payee if the person with autism needs somebody to actually manage the SSI benefits. So this is a long process. It's a complicated process. And again, it makes parent advocacy really difficult when you're trying to navigate this plus other adult services that are equally complicated. So to address service disparities and improve outcomes, we think one way is to develop and test parent advocacy interventions. So this is one of the interventions I want to speak about today. Originally, when we formed it, it was called the VAPT. Now we call it ASSIST. It is a 24-hour advocacy training program. It is geared for parents of transition-aged youth with autism. We specify transition-aged youth as parents of children who are between the ages of 16 to 26. And I can talk a little bit more about that age range if you have questions about how we chose that. Like I said, it's 24 hours. So it's usually 2 hours a week for 12 weeks. It's done in a cohort model. So parents attend with one another, either virtually or in person, so they can learn from one another's lived experiences in navigating adult services. It covers all of these different topics. So when I said that the adult service delivery system is fragmented, the VAPT is supposed to be one of the few curricula available that consolidates all of these adult disability services in one curriculum, so that you're not going to different places for information. You're able to get it all in one curriculum. So it covers medical, like health insurance, Medicare, person-centered thinking, special needs trust, employment, including vocational rehabilitative services, non-adversarial advocacy skills. So we're really trying to impart to families ways to be assertive without being aggressive. It goes over decision-making, including supported decision-making and conservatorship options, post-secondary education, including accommodations that a youth with autism can receive in a college, a 4-year or 2-year setting, as well as programs that are for students with intellectual disability in the post-secondary ed setting. It goes over SSI that I just covered, as well as SSDI, housing, and secondary education. So another thing that's very unique about the VAPT or ASSIST is that We do not cut anybody off based on the strengths or support needs of their youth with autism. This is one of the few interventions that we have that is really across the spectrum of functioning. What we have noticed is, some people will come in and they'll say post-secondary education doesn't apply for my child. I don't want to attend that session. And some people think that really applies for their child and that their child's not going to be qualifying for SSI. But for the most part, most parents who go through this say they don't know where their child is at and what they're going to need. So they want to get all of the information. And so it's offered to everyone equally. Now, we initially received an R34 grant to develop and test the VAP-T or assist in a small pilot randomized control trial. It was done in Tennessee. And what we found between the intervention and the control group, that the intervention group before and after the training was significantly more likely to have greater knowledge about adult disability services, advocacy skills and comforts. They felt more comfortable advocating for adult disability services, and they felt more empowered to access services. So these are kind of the mechanisms that we're looking at. We're saying if a parent feels more knowledgeable about adult disability services, if they feel better able to advocate and they feel empowered, then it should enable the youth with autism to access more services, and then subsequently, because they're able to access more services, to either have better employment outcomes or better post-secondary education outcomes. Now, this small pilot RCT was about 40 families in Tennessee. And what we did is we looked within this very tiny sample whether or not those distal outcomes that I just mentioned came to fruition. And we found that they did. So between the intervention and the control group, we saw significantly more services happening in the intervention versus the control group 6 months after completing the program. So the idea, again, is this domino effect. If you have increased knowledge, advocacy, skills, empowerment, takes a while, but then you should see more services. And then that might take a while, but you should see increased access to employment or post-secondary education, which also happened. So when we just looked at the RCT and we only looked at the youth who were out of high school, we saw that all of the youth in our intervention group were either in employment or post-secondary education. And fewer of them were in the control group, were engaged in employment or post-secondary education. We were very excited about these results. It shows some real promise for the VAP-T. But as you may expect, as people who are likely living in Illinois, you might be wondering, well, that's great, it works in Tennessee, but would it work here in Illinois? Like I said earlier, Illinois does have a pretty distinct service delivery system. And so how can you take something like this, especially something that's grounded in adult disability services that we know are so state specific, would it be generalizable to other states? So we thought the same thing. And we were lucky enough to get an R01 grant from the National Institute of Mental Health to really test that out. And so we renamed the VAP-T into Assist. The only difference is that we're saying that the Assist is a nationally relevant project. So what we do in Assist is that at the beginning of every Assist session, it's still 12 weeks, 24-hour training. But at the beginning of the session, we show a video. The video is shown at each state, no matter what state you're in, taking Assist. And the video reflects nationally relevant information about the service that's going to be talked about that night. So everybody gets that information. Then after you go through the video, you have a specific state expert who talks about how that policy or service works within your respective state. And that helps to get at some of maybe the distinct geographic things that are going on. This was a multi-site randomized control trial across Illinois, Tennessee, and Wisconsin. We're just starting to wrap it up in year 5 now. We've been doing this for 5 years. We had over 180 families participate in the program. As you would expect, and as is similar across all of my advocacy program research, it's primarily moms of youth with autism who went through the training. They were primarily white. And in terms of family income, they were actually pretty variable. So we had a pretty diverse sample in terms of family income, much less so when we look at race and ethnicity, which I'll circle back to later. So this graph just gives you an idea of procedurally how did this work. Another distinction that I didn't mention is that the VAP-T was administered by people at Vanderbilt with guest speakers coming in from across the state. For Assist, we specifically worked with a community partner to say, let's take this out of the ivory tower, and let's really put this in the community. Is this something that a community partner could carry out on their own? Is this something that could be effective? Is it something that could be sustainable beyond the scope of this grant if it works? And we were very fortunate to work with TAP. So we worked with Linda Tortorelli specifically, and she was the one who really implemented and facilitated every week of the training, and then had the specific guest experts come into every session. And what we found is, yes, this is something, a curriculum that's able to be well executed with high fidelity with a community partner. Now, while we worked with TAP here in Illinois, Vanderbilt worked with the ARC of Tennessee, and Wisconsin worked with their Developmental Disabilities Council. So each of us worked with different community partners, but as you can see, regardless of who our community partnering agency was, we had high fidelity to the curriculum for each and every session. So it shows that this is able to be executed regardless of who's doing it. Now, as with most other interventions that happened during COVID, our initial impression based on the VAPT was that this is an intervention that should be done in person. This is an intervention that should be done in a cohort format where parents can learn and meet and befriend one another. We know that's so valuable to the parent learning experience. And so we started this in January or February of 2020 and had a few in-person sessions. And then in March, stopped for a little while and thought maybe COVID would blow over. Obviously, that wasn't the case. And so we switched everything quickly to an online format using Zoom and picked it up again in May or June. Now, we ran it with 4 different cohorts. So if you're in the control group, it was a waitlist control group. So they eventually also got the curriculum. So we've ran it all together 4 times in our different states. But what this did allow us to do is to ask the people who were able to complete the training in person and over Zoom, so that initial cohort where COVID interrupted the training for them, what did they think? Did it seem to work better one way than another way? Like how should we tell community agencies to implement this in the future? And so what you can tell from this is that for the most part, they were similarly satisfied with the sessions. They learned from the sessions. They got new information from the sessions. But there was a little less of connecting with other families when it was done over Zoom. And there was a little bit less of feeling like you're part of a group when it was done over Zoom. And so that kind of sense of belonging is something that was a little bit lost when we transitioned to the online only format. As a caveat to that, on the flip side, it did open us up so that people across the state could participate. There were no transportation or logistical issues because people could just do it over Zoom. And so it was really it's a trade-off in thinking about the feasibility of this. But I share this because I think it raises some really interesting questions moving forward of should this best be done? And how could it most feasibly be done? And the answer to those questions may be a little different. So I initially shared this slide. What I wanted to show here is that, even though we had over 180 families from these different states, we had very, very underrepresented Latino families participate in the project. And this is a big problem because we know that there are compounded systemic barriers among Latino families in accessing adult services. We also know there are some unique barriers facing Latino families in accessing adult services. And so if we return back to this SSI slide that I showed before, like I said, this is a very complicated process for anyone to learn how to navigate. It's very tricky to understand what you're entitled to and how to apply for these services. When we look at Latino families specifically, there are some more unique barriers than may impact other families. So, when you're initially applying for SSI, you may think, oh no, I have an aunt, I have an uncle, I have somebody in another country who has left my child money, has left them property, has left them some kind of asset, and that counts against the asset limit for SSI and could make somebody ineligible. You also may wonder how citizenship fits into SSI requirements. The person does have to be a citizen or a permanent resident, and so that's another concern that may affect certain families. You still wait the 6 months, you're still likely to get rejected from SSI, But then you get to the appealing SSI decision. And so, like I said before, there are multiple layers to appealing an SSI decision. Usually parents may be able to do the first level of the appeal, but as you escalate up, if that's not successful, you may need to go to a hearing, you may need to get an attorney. And there are very, very few attorneys in the state of Illinois who are also Spanish speaking who do SSI appeals. And so you can imagine if 2/3 of people automatically get rejected from getting SSI, if something escalates up to that level, it can be especially difficult for some Latino families to be able to appeal a decision. Hopefully you get the SSI and then designated the representative payee. So it may be that the transition-aged youth is a permanent resident or a citizen, but maybe they need somebody to manage the SSI for them, which would be a representative payee. And then the parent, if they're not a citizen or a permanent resident, may be wondering, am I even eligible to serve in that role? If not me, who? And so this is just to give you thinking about some of the unique barriers that we may see in adult service delivery systems for Latino families. So as a result of that, my doctoral student, Janeth, who's now an assistant professor at California State at Chico University, for her dissertation, she adapted half of ASSIST, and we called it Assistir. And so instead of the full 24-hour curriculum, she did about 12 hours. She adapted it so it's all available in Spanish and English at the preference of the family. She adapted all of the videos with funding from TAP. So we have all of the national videos done in Spanish by a Latina mom of a child with autism. And we also adapted a lot of the curriculum to look at some of these unique barriers that we know Latino families may face in accessing services, so they're a little bit more relevant, as well as to be more strengths-based in thinking about familial capital and thinking about familism and other values that may be held in the culture that we can really capitalize on in the program. So she ran this 12-hour training. She ran it in Spanish and English. Most families chose the Spanish version of it. And she had 29 Latino families of transition-age youth with autism participate. Just as with the ASSIST program, they were primarily moms. But I will say that the annual household income for most of them was below $50,000 a year. So we're seeing very limited kind of socioeconomic resources of families, and they were still participating in a pretty lengthy 12-hour training. Most families were primarily Mexican, most had some college or less, and they were, we made sure the curriculum was still accessible. Most only spoke Spanish and most were married. Now, at the end of the 12-hour program, from our pre-post survey results, we found that there were significant increases in school-based transition planning knowledge. So they felt like they really understood what a transition plan is, what they're entitled to in a transition plan meeting, who should be at the table when we're talking about transition planning in the school system. We also saw significant increases in adult services knowledge. So how do I apply for SSI? How am I eligible for Medicare? What does Medicaid home and community-based services provide me? That kind of information. We saw significant increases in their comfort level with being able to advocate for adult disability services. And then for empowerment, we saw that families reported that they themselves felt more empowered after completing the program. They felt more empowered to seek services, and they felt more empowered within their communities and the service delivery system to really access services. So now with Janeth and working with Grupo Salto, as well as the ARC of Illinois and other agencies, we are further adapting ASSIST. So we're going to take the full 12 sessions and make them all adapted and available in Spanish for Latino families and test it out to see if it works. So the full 24-hour program, just given how promising Janeth's dissertation results were, we think that the rest of us can be really helpful for a lot of families. Right now, we're just wrapping up adapting the measures. So the measures that I talked about in the previous slide, adult disability services knowledge, school-based transition planning knowledge, advocacy skills, empowerment, those measures have been translated into Spanish, but there hasn't been any research to really look at the individual items in those measures and make sure that they're culturally responsive. And so we're taking some time and working with 30 Latino families to review those items, to ask them, okay, this is the question in the item. What does that mean to you? How would you change it? How would you make it more accessible? And we just finished our 30 interviews. We've revised it quite a bit. We've worked with Julie Lowndes Taylor at Vanderbilt to look at the revisions. We've worked with Sandy Magana, who's now at UT Austin, to also look at the revisions. And we're going to take those revised measures back to the families, ask them to complete them, and see if they're a bit more responsive and sensitive to the needs of Latino families. In the fall, we plan on conducting the randomized control trial with 50 Latino families of transition-aged youth with autism to see whether or not we have similar results to what we have for ASSIST. So I don't have those results yet, obviously, because we haven't started the RCT. But what I do want to share is that obviously we're hypothesizing that we're going to see really strong, significant increases in knowledge, in empowerment, and in advocacy. And hopefully those improvements should lead to increased access to services and better outcomes for transition-aged youth with autism. And that's the researcher in me. The parent in me, though, really wants to see that we're able to build this network of families who are able to meet one another, who have long-lasting friendships after the completion of the program, who can rely on one another after the grant has ended. And so while we don't have that obviously yet with Assistir, we have done a very similar project to Assistir. We did a parent advocacy training for Latino families in Spanish for school-age services, for special education services. And at the end of that program, we had families kind of talk about what they learned. And so I just want to share this really brief clip from a mom who went through that program, sharing what she learned from it. So you can get a sense of like, this is the goal. This is what we're going for beyond the numbers and the significant increases. Like, this is the feeling that we want people to have.
Ya me emocioné. Y que clases como esta nos ayudan a entender y que tenemos apoyo que ni nos imaginamos. Y no estamos solos.
So I share that. I know it's a really brief clip, but I think when we talk about these outcome measures, I think it's important to get at kind of insiderness and belonging that I think is probably one of the key ingredients to any of these parent advocacy programs that I've been talking about. And I think what we haven't gotten to yet either is that we're very focused on the outcomes for the youth with autism as a result of parents increasing their own advocacy. But I think eventually what I'd also like to get at is parents feeling more efficacious as a result of the program, parents hopefully feeling less stressed because they understand what services they're entitled to and how to navigate them, and feeling more connected potentially. So some of these health and mental health outcomes that we haven't gotten to yet, I think we have some, at least anecdotal data to say there's something that's going on beyond just with the youth, which is definitely important, but with the family unit as a whole. So current and next steps, like I said, we are wrapping up the last wave of data collection with ASSIST right now. Again, that was a 5-year study. So we're just starting to evaluate the outcomes. I did share that we had high fidelity for the training. We had high attendance. So about 90% of the participants attended all of the sessions. So it seems very feasible. We had very low attrition. We did have some significant increases in knowledge, empowerment, and advocacy with the VAPT, which is the pilot, but also with ASSIST. And right now we're exploring the data to see the effect on access to services. What we're hoping to do in the future is that we just received a really promising score on adapting ASSIST for the school context. So this is really taking the ASSIST that's all about adult disability services, adapting the curriculum for special education teachers. And so then the teachers would work with families and transition-aged youth with autism and inform them about, here's what SSI is, here's what PUNS is, here's how you advocate and navigate these service delivery systems, and seeing whether that would be another setting to really increase parent advocacy. We're also looking into whether or not we should adapt ASSIST into a navigator model. So, not everybody is going to have 24 hours that they're going to be willing or able to participate in to learn all about these different adult disability services. And so it may be helpful for some people, but not for everyone. Would it be more helpful for some people to have a navigator, maybe a parent of an adult with autism who has been there and has already navigated the service delivery systems? Could we then link a parent of a child who's transitioning into adult services with the parent with more lived experience and say, this parent is your navigator? Let's see if they're able to kind of hold your hand a little bit more than just a training and empower you and enable you and educate you so that eventually you're able to do it on your own. Would that be an effective model, kind of going above and beyond the training aspect that we have in Assist? So we're trying to think through that as a potential next step. In terms of Assistir, we're wrapping up the adaptation of the measures, hoping to conduct the RCT in the fall. And then depending on the results, fingers crossed it's successful, really looking into scaling up Assistir into a much bigger National Institute of Mental Health grant, and hopefully scaling it up in such a way that we're able to test it, just like we did with Assist, across multiple states to make sure that it could be a nationally relevant model that different agencies can use. So these are our funders. I know I've left a lot of time for questions. I feel like I maybe went too fast through that, but I'm happy to answer anything.
Thank you so much, Dr. Burke. That is wonderful to hear about your research and about the Assistir translated project. We don't have any questions in the Q&A just yet. Are you also translating Assist into other languages besides Spanish, or thinking about doing so?
That is a really good question. Not right now. No, I think what we've learned is that, you know, it has to go beyond just the translation, right? And making sure it's culturally responsive. And so, you know, it's not that there's definitely not a need, because there's definitely a big need for this information in other languages. But we haven't started anything like that yet. That's a good question.
I was just curious on that. And subsequent to the research that Dr. Burke and colleagues participated in Assist, then they were able to turn over this training to TAP, the statewide network, and we just rolled out our first pilot program of a 12-week, 2-hour each Monday night program that started in February. We will end May 1st, and we plan to have it available again next year. Being statewide, it's open to anyone in Illinois. But so far, we have seen very robust discussions and questions. We go till 8 o'clock each time. I always think there's going to be lots of extra time, but parents are so engaged and they have such good questions and feel comfortable sharing in that environment. We tried to keep it small, like you did, in a small cohort. So we have about 15 who regularly attend every Monday. And they often will write and say if they have to miss or something to please send the slides. So far that has been really successful, and we look forward to doing it again. Yeah.
I'm so glad to hear that. I mean, that's the whole goal, right? In working with a community partner is developing something, again, if it's effective, that can actually be implemented after a grant ends, right? I mean, that otherwise, I don't want to say what's the point, but I mean, otherwise.
Right. And, I also am a parent of a transition-aged youth with autism, and I am learning right along with everyone. The adult system is complicated and siloed in Illinois. So that's why we bring in those statewide experts that we have found throughout the state that specialize in special needs law or the Medicaid waiver, for example. And it's just been such a great learning experience and so great to share. And you do feel like a group, even in the virtual format. I feel like the parents have shared with me that they feel like they're connecting.
That's good. I'm so glad they'll have one another after this.
Yes.
Which is so nice. nice. I'm so glad that it's going. Well, I feel like I'm always learning. I could go to an SSI talk and I learn something new every single time because things are changing and it's so much information to take in. And I think, that's when we think about 24 hours of training, it's a big commitment, especially for a parent who can be busy. But it's such complicated material. And, you could spend 50 hours on it, right? So it's that balance.
Mm-hmm. And I do see the benefit of in person. You really get that connection, and maybe like the one mom is paying it forward and has started a group for other moms, in her culture, like her, in her neighborhood or region. And then the Zoom has a benefit too, because parents don't have to find childcare. Sometimes they've got their video camera on and the little one's right in their lap and, things are going on at home, but they're still able to listen and engage to the extent that they can. So.
I'm glad it enables you to reach more people, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think it's just the direction that the world is, we'll see, but I think that's the way the world is headed.
Yes, agreed. Yeah. And so in our cohort right now, we have folks from Rockford, Chicago, Belleville, Central Illinois area. So they kind of are dispersed throughout the state. And I think it might be neat to think about the future if we were to roll it out regionally in certain areas so that there can be a closer cohort with more commonality for that region in the state as a possibility.
I think that would be interesting. I think it's always interesting when families, maybe they can be more cohesive if they're from the same region, but then also, cover the rural areas. I think it's also too, I should speak for myself. It's hard for me to always think about like what's possible when I only know what's available, right? And so when I living in Illinois, what's available here, which is often, unfortunately, not that much. But then when I hear what's happening in Minnesota or Massachusetts, or, it opens my eyes to think, oh, we could do this differently, or, and so sometimes that's nice, I think, within the state too, for people to hear like, well, maybe we don't do this in Champaign, but in Chicago, they do it this way. And it's hard. It's easier to visualize, I think, out of the box, at least for me, when I hear about other people's experiences.
Agreed. We can learn a lot from one another each time. That's awesome. Yeah. So Megan, are you okay with sharing your slides after this? Okay.
Yeah, definitely. Great. Yeah. And I know since we have just a few seconds, I think I anticipated more questions. Yeah. Disparities are very real in this state, everywhere, really. I think something that I teased but didn't go into detail about is the 16 to 26 age range. And so this is also, I'll be curious to hear what your group thinks, or where age range, where they landed, because we've had families of 12-year-olds say, I want to be in this training. I want to learn about adult disability services. And I think on the one hand, that's great because they want to know what's around the corner and they want to prepare and learn the information. But on the other hand, it's like, well, we talk about SSI applying it for adults, and you can't apply for it until your child's 18. So we would be giving you this information 6 years before you'd be able to use it. And we're hoping now with the bigger sample we have across the 3 states to really understand the timing of this. Like, when would be the right time to offer something like this? Because too early, you can't use it. Too late, right? You're like, just like that mom in the initial video, you're thinking, I could have used this 4 years ago if I had known then what I know now. And so what are the ages of your families? Yeah, timing is key, right? Timing is key. And these are questions we don't know the answer to, which we should, right? Because we don't want to waste families' time going through a 24-hour training and then they say, oh, I can't use this for a couple of years. But I also can understand, as a very type A person myself, wanting to know what's around the corner and having having some understanding of what I'm up against, you know?
Definitely. And rules could change too, state guidelines or something could change, and then that would make the previous information inapplicable by the time that family is ready to use it. For our current cohort, due to the legislative mandate of our grant serving up through age 22, we opened it up for parents of children aged 14 to 22 to register. And that we were kind of going with the 14 and a half time of school for transition planning. And it turned out that most, I would say, goodness, all but one are in their teen years. And we have maybe one who's 20. That's just how it happened to fall in our registration. So of the 15, they range in age from 15 to mostly 15 to 18, somewhere in there. And then I think we have maybe one 19 and one 20-year-old in that group. So
that's interesting. Yeah, that's what Kristen just wrote.
Yeah.
It's overwhelming, even for seasoned parent. I think, yeah, I agree. It's so difficult to navigate for everyone, right? And then there are great disparities, geographically, linguistically, culturally. I mean, this is complicated stuff, which is why, again, we have the program, which I think is great, Assist. We're adapting it into C-STEER, but I think it's also what some families may want a navigator. They may want someone to really walk them through it. That might be how some families learn best. And I think there are some families, though, who just getting the Assist curriculum and reading through it could navigate adult disability services. And so differentiating and making different options to make this less overwhelming for families is, I think it's not going to be a one size fits all approach.
That makes complete sense. Yes. Very good. Any other questions? Okay, yeah, so we've got some providers with us. Kristen is both a provider and a parent. So if you do not know, our sessions today are all being recorded, and we will have those posted on our TAP YouTube channel in about 2 weeks. So if you had internet connectivity issues or dropped off or missed a portion or want to re-listen, they'll be available on our TAP YouTube channel in a couple of weeks. So make sure you subscribe and look for those there. Well, thank you so much, Megan. It looks like we might wrap up a little bit early. We are so grateful to you for sharing your research on the Assist program, and we're so happy to be able to collaborate with you at the University of Illinois and look forward to future collaborations as well.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So just a few things before we go, and we are going to let you all have a good portion of your day left here. We want to thank everyone for participating in our 2023 TAP Autism Symposium. We're so grateful to Dr. Kasari, our keynote presenter, as well as all of our TAP network partners who shared their knowledge and expertise through the presentations today. If our presenters are willing to share their slide presentations, we are going to send them by email, along with the links from UIC and the list from SIU Carbondale. If you requested CEUs, you will receive those via email in about 2 weeks. And again, we did record the symposium, so look for those vignettes on our TAP YouTube channel in about 2 weeks. And finally, I did put the TAP survey in the chat earlier. Please complete our survey. It's also going to pop up when the session ends today and you're getting ready to log out. Please complete our survey. It helps us with our continued grant funding to be able to provide these expert-led trainings all across the state for everyone. So thank you all. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and we look forward to the next Autism Symposium. Thanks.